We are live. It's the Revved Up 906 podcast, a Detroit Pistons podcast, to be exact. And I'm Hudson.
And I'm Ryan.
And before we get into episode number 36 of season 2, I got to talk to you, the people, about a few quick things. First off, make sure to like and subscribe. And if you want to be in the know whenever we are uploading clips, stuff to the community, or just overall episodes, make sure to click the bell on our YouTube profile. That will give you notifications as soon as we post anything to our YouTube profile. Also, if you haven't checked out our merch yet, make sure to click on the link in the description below or in our YouTube bio, and that link will bring you to Grind Clothing Co.'s website. They are our official merch sponsor. You can check out a plethora of different design options. There's sure to be something that you like that we've partnered up and made with Revved Up 906. Also, as you can tell, I'm wearing my little American flag hat. If you guys are watching this on the 4th of July or on the Wednesday that this comes out, happy Independence Day. Thanks for tuning in. We appreciate y'all. And hopefully you guys all enjoy your July 4th with family, friends, and loved ones. We're going to be talking about JB Bickerstaff in this week's episode. So if you have any hot takes, comments, questions, first takes, make sure to comment below. We'd love to know what you guys have to say. We love to kind of get an inside look at what the Pistons community is talking about and what you guys are thinking. And if you guys aren't so much into long form content, you're just happen to be watching this video, make sure to follow us on Instagram and still subscribe, because on both platforms, we post around 30-second clips weekly. So that may be your more, cup of tea and what you enjoy more. So make sure to still subscribe so you can still take in Detroit Pistons content. Without further ado, let's get into episode number 36 of season 2. And as most of you know, maybe some of you don't know, Trajan Langdon and Tom Gores have hired JB Bickerstaff as the head coach to replace Monty Williams. And Ryan, when talking about JB Bickerstaff, it's kind of an interesting pickup because he's led the Cavaliers to the Eastern Conference playoffs in consecutive years, including last season. And from his time taking over from John Beilein, legendary Michigan coach, as an interim coach, had a record of 170 and 50 wins and 159 losses. That's a 51.7% win percentage in just 5 seasons with the Cleveland Cavaliers. All of that with the Cavaliers. And he brought the Cavaliers through a rebuild, winning 99 regular season games in 2 seasons. Comes from a long line of coaches, his dad being a great head coach in the NBA. But Ryan, when we talked about just last week about who the possible candidates were for the head coach position with the Detroit Pistons, JB Bickerstaff wasn't necessarily the guy that we thought was at the top of the list. We maybe thought he was a 3rd, 4th option. So when you saw Tom Gores and Monty Williams made this decision, what were some of your first thoughts going through your mind?
Yeah, when I saw this, I was sitting there going like, actually, between all the candidates possible, I'm not upset about this. James Borrego, I would have questioned it a little bit, just because even though he has one stint under his belt in Charlotte, he's not like an incredible head coach. Obviously, Charlotte has not done a lot of winning since him, but that just tells you how bad the franchise is. Borrego was a Pop product, a Greg Popovich product there. JB Bickerstaff comes from a coaching family. His dad coaching in the NBA for a long time. He's had multiple stints with multiple different teams, between Charlotte as an assistant on his dad's coaching staff, Minnesota, Houston, Memphis, and then of course finishing up with Cleveland before joining us. He's been in the NBA for a long time. He's seen a lot of different things. He was with a bunch of different head coaches between his dad, Bernie Bickerstaff, Kurt Rambis, Kevin McHale, David Fizdale, and then of course Go Blue, John Beilein. So he's been around of different coaches, different play styles. He's a good coach. He's not a bad coach. My biggest takeaway out of the signing of him was, well, at least it's not James Borrego. And then after that, I'm sitting there going like, oh, that's a little disappointing that it wasn't Sean Sweeney or it wasn't Mike Nori, because those two candidates were our top two if there were to be a top two. So there was a little disappointment there. But overall, like JB Bickerstaff is known as developing teams. He obviously brought Cleveland through a rebuild, and brought them to a great place. Obviously, they didn't hit that great place until they landed Donovan Mitchell. But even without Donovan Mitchell, the way they won games, the impact that he had on that team, you could tell that his impact was there from the beginning. Obviously came in as an interim, filling in for John Beilein, but still, like, from his first head coaching role with the Cleveland Cavaliers as an interim to where he ended up, like, he did a phenomenal job with that team. And that only not only excites me, but it gives me hope with this young Pistons team, because the Pistons almost, obviously much worse than Cleveland was at that first start of the rebuild, but we're pretty almost similar to the point that Cleveland was at as is. And if JV Bickerstaff was able to lead them in the right direction to where they are now, obviously Donovan Mitchell helps, because Mitchell is an all-around all-star caliber player, all pro. But still, what he was able to do in 5 seasons in Cleveland, very impressive, and it excites me for the future with the Pistons.
Yeah, and obviously when JB Bickerstaff was heading into his first full season as the Cavs coach, they pick up Isaac Okoro in the draft. And Isaac was one of those guys who was known to be this athletic shot creator, but they didn't know if he could shoot efficiently. And he had a solid rookie year, and then he goes into his second season and really struggles. And then JB Bickerstaff comes in and he really hits Isaac Okoro hard in this development phase, and this taking this next step. And a lot of what JB Bickerstaff did is attributed to why Isaac Okoro made this great comeback, is now a very highly touted role player. And then obviously, they would end up getting the big man. What's the big man's name? Drawing a blank. Ryan, can you help me
Jared
out?
Allen.
No, the rookie.
Oh, Evan Mobley.
Yeah, Evan Mobley. Then they bring into a guy like Evan Mobley, who, seems to be like this generational talent, and he's been able to keep him fairly consistent. And then they draft guys like Darius Garland and so on. And so it seems like he works better with guards, in my opinion. It seems like with the Cavs being a very guard heavy team. Was there another point guard there with Darius Garland and not just Donovan Mitchell?
Well, it would have been Colin Sexton, but Sexton's not there anymore. He's in Utah.
Yeah, so
But there's a handful of different guys that they've had over the course of the last couple years.
Yeah, so Colin Sexton would have been a guy that, JB Bickerstaff tried to mold and help out. But Darius Garland, an all-star last year, Donovan Mitchell, an all-star. So it seems to me that he's been able to really, and Isaac Okoro, able to put it into that wing guard mold. It seems to me that he's very good at getting these point guards involved and making the offense run through him. With them. So what I'm hoping to see with JB Bickerstaff coming in is him kind of work very closely with Marcus Sasser, Cade Cunningham, and Jaden Ivey, and try to get them to be these offensive leaders that can really facilitate, make an offense work through them. And obviously you have to attribute, just Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell being just great talents. But there's a coach at the helm that's kind of a mastermind behind everything. So that's why I kind of like that JB Bickerstaff is coming into this Detroit Pistons team that has guards that are trying to still figure things out. We know that Cade Cunningham is the centerpiece of this Detroit Pistons team right now, but we want to see a little bit more from him as far as at the helm of this Detroit Pistons offense. And I'm hoping JB Bickerstaff will be able to come in and give some instant relief and advice and thoughts for Cade Cunningham of how he sees him working this offense. And another point of why it's kind of good to start fresh with another head coach is because these players are very malleable. They're very moldable. They're still young. They're still getting used to the NBA. Cade Cunningham at the end of last season just realized of, okay, maybe I know what the NBA is all about now. And he was just finished his second and a quarter full season. And so I think with a guy like Jaden Ivey and Marcus Sasser, hopefully they can be very moldable with a JB Bickerstaff at the helm, just because it seems he's a very great leader for those guards and swing wings. What are your thoughts, Ryan?
Yeah. So when I think of what he could help the team with, obviously he's a developmental head coach. Having the experience at multiple different organizations is going to help this team. I think that was what Langdon really was going after, is a guy with experience, because obviously I personally think, and you would agree, that Sean Sweeney and Mike Connorty were the better candidates for this job. But they didn't have the experience at the head coaching level that JB Bickerstaff
Right.
had, or that James Borrego had. That's why what Borrego was getting talked about as much as he had been, is because he was actually a realistic top tier candidate for this job just from experience alone. What Sean Sweeney and what Mike Connorty have is, obviously they've been around the league for a long time too. Mike Connorty has experience from a baseball perspective as a coach. Sean Sweeney has the perspective of just being around Jason Kidd, a Hall of Fame player, a good head coach in the NBA, and just being one of those guys that comes out and starts at a little tier of a job, a low tier of a video coordinator, kind of like Eric Spoelstra with the Miami Heat. Like, that's where he came from. So obviously those guys had a little bit more of a different route to the NBA, whereas obviously JB Bickerstaff comes from a coaching family, has been a long-time assistant, interim head coaches in multiple stops, head coaches in multiple stops, has developed Cleveland into the team that they are right now. Obviously Donovan Mitchell and all those guys, like Evan Mobley, getting him drafted in there helps significantly. But what JB Bickerstaff, to me, obviously outside of experience alone, tells me and shows me is that Langdon sees him as a guy that not only can follow directions, but isn't going to go off the path of what Langdon's trying to do. He's going to follow and listen and pay attention and really try to mold these guys and develop these guys. Because Monty came in, Monty wasn't trying to develop all these guys. He was trying to develop the fundamentals, because obviously training camp came out, Monty Williams, sticking hard on the fundamentals, bringing defense into practices, trying to develop that side of the ball, which it showed. Jaden Ivey developed more of a defensive game than he's ever had. So it's not to say that Monty was doing a bad job. It's just it wasn't doing the job that was thorough enough to develop this young team that JB Bickerstaff was able to do with the Cleveland Cavaliers. That a lot of those guys, Darius Garland, Evan Mobley, Isaac Okoro, all these guys are within the same mold, you could say, as Cade Cunningham, Jaden Ivey, Jalen Duren. Like, all these guys are top tier talented players, but you got to develop that. And JB Bickerstaff, I believe, follows directions and will not go off the path that Langdon is trying to create, and just help out and create this culture around the Pistons that you're going to see. Cade Cunningham obviously just signed a massive contract extension, but you're going to see these guys take a huge jump in their game potentially next season, given the fact of the experience and the level of expertise that Bickerstaff has had thus far in his career. And so just not only the expertise, but the fact that he won't go off the beaten path is something that I think Langdon wanted to go after. And that's why I think Bickerstaff is going to be a great coach for the Pistons.
Just to give a little bit of more of JB Bickerstaff's resume, last season with the Cleveland Cavaliers was they were fourth seed with a record of 48 wins, 34 losses, and beating the Orlando Magic in the opening round of the playoffs. And then to give a little bit of insight on JB Bickerstaff's deal, if you don't know, it's a 5-year deal with the Detroit Pistons. What I kind of like about this, Ryan, is it's kind of showing us that we're hoping JB is in the long-term future in the next 5 years. Because if you look 5 years from now, Cade Cunningham is going into his 8th season, with the Detroit Pistons, and we're going to be seeing a lot of re-ups, hopefully. And that's what I kind of like about this deal, is that when you have a fireball of a mess that you had with the Monty Williams, you're looking for some consistency at the head coaching position. And JB Bickerstaff is not a guy that's known for, necessarily jumping around. He had a great stint there with the Cleveland Cavaliers, and I'm thinking he's trying to replicate that with the Detroit Pistons. As far as some coaching experience, he's been with the Charlotte Bobcats as an assistant coach, Minnesota Timberwolves for 4 years, as an assistant coach with the Houston Rockets for 4 years. And actually, for a total of 5 years, he started as an assistant coach and then went to interim head coach with the Memphis Grizzlies from 2016 to 2019, and then with the Cleveland Cavaliers from 2019. One of the names we talked about when we did an overview of coaching candidates of coaches JB has worked under is Bernie Bickerstaff, his dad with the Charlotte Bobcats, Kevin McHale with the Houston Rockets, David Fizdale with the Memphis Grizzlies, known to be a really smart head coach, and then John Beilein, as we mentioned before. One thing I like about the Detroit Pistons going right into like a guy like JB Bickerstaff is that hopefully only with the Pistons as a whole, the roster, only having 1 year under Monty Williams' schemes, it's interesting because hopefully JB will be able to kind of move on to his own thought process and game plans. And Monty Williams seemed very much so as a game plan oriented coach, kind of like a Dwayne Casey, where JB Bickerstaff has known for making deep runs in the playoffs year after year after year. Hopefully he's more of a game manager. I think that's a little bit more of what this young Detroit Pistons team needs. Our last two coaches were game plan and try to reevaluate at the half, when it'd be great to try to have some coaches that are a little bit more known for game managers, switching up the rotation, not letting five bench players in at one time, keeping at least two starters in at certain times. At times last year, Monty Williams, role players, and they just weren't always consistent. I want us to try to see some consistency out of this Detroit Pistons roster. One thing I wanted to mention, Ryan, is Greg Kelser of Bally Sports has been a game announcer for the Detroit Pistons for many, many years, since we were just young lads. And Greg Kelser was on a podcast recently, and he said with the Detroit Pistons roster last season, they tried to lose 14 games. And he thinks that Monty Williams, in a way, through the season and just to try to get out of this situation. Ryan, when you look up and down the roster, it's not too far off that the roster as a whole looks like a more than 14 game winning season type of team. So maybe that's one of the reasons Monty Williams got fired, is it just seemed by the front office that, like, what's this guy doing? What are some of your thoughts on the last coaching staff at the helm, and with the roster that we had and the talent we had, that they just really provided and just really had a really bad season because of the coaching staff?
Yeah, when you look at the roster, it realistically is not the worst in the league. Everybody bashes us, critiques us, looks to be like, oh, it's a bum franchise. No, we're actually a good franchise. Obviously, one of the more winningest franchises in NBA history. Obviously, 3 championships is not much to speak about, but there's a lot of teams that haven't even won one yet. So with that being said, like this roster, obviously not built to win a championship. It's evident. You don't even have to really consider it or even question it, really. You look up and down the roster, like, oh, Cade Cunningham, okay, he could win a championship. Jalen Duren, yep. Jaden Ivey, yep. And then you go to Sar and you go, keep going and keep going. You're like, yeah, this team's not winning the championship this year, or even next year, or even maybe 3 years from now. This team's not there yet. That's what you're saying. But in Monty, in that whole situation, what Greg mentioned, I wouldn't disagree with that, because there were situations and times where it felt like the Pistons were trying to lose these games. And it wasn't necessarily the players themselves trying to lose these games. Monty was just putting these guys in certain positions where they'd lose these games. Now, we can't confirm that it's outright and true, but Greg Kelser is a great source, great basketball mind. He's played in the NBA for a long time, very successful career at Michigan State at the college level. He's won a championship at the college level. He knows what he's talking about. So when he's outright just publicly saying that, I'm going to listen to Greg Kelser 100%. He knows what he's talking about. But like again, it's not proven whether or not that's true. But like the two games that we were there watching, the Heat versus the Pistons, and then even just countless other games, it seemed like Monty Williams was putting these players in situations to lose games. He wasn't going like, yeah, okay, Marvin Bagley, you're out there, you're going to win us this game. Because we know Bagley was not consistent at the beginning of the year at all. He's never been consistent as a Piston. He's been putting these guys out there, and it's evident, like, okay, first off, there's no way in heck you're putting like Marvin Bagley up against name countless other big men, like Walker Kessler as an example. Walker Kessler is so much better than Marvin Bagley. You're not putting him up against him. That's an unfair matchup. Of course, Kessler is going to beat him 100% of the time. But there were all these matchups this past year where if Greg Kelser is saying that, and obviously we all Pistons fans saw it with our own eyes, like Monty is clearly not in it for the long haul. He's wanting these games to be lost. He's wanting to just go on this historic losing streak and just give up. And he definitely was in it for the money. Granted, we can't confirm it once again, but I mean, every Pistons fan out there will agree with my statement that he clearly wasn't trying as hard as he could have. He wasn't putting the best players out there at the right times. He was a terrible game manager. And with that being said, like he really just he did a bad job. That's the bottom line. So when Greg Kelser comes out and says that, I'm going to believe him because he knows what he's talking about. He's been with the Pistons from and just Valley Sports in general, Fox Sports Detroit. He's been with Detroit sports for a very long time and Michigan sports in general for a very long time. And so I don't see Greg Kelser sitting there going and bashing Monty if it's not true. So it's kind of like, oh, Greg Kelser, you just confirmed it. I didn't want to believe it, but you just confirmed it.
Well, and Greg Kelser through and through is a Detroit Pistons just super fan. And for him to stick around through thick and thin, through all the losing seasons, and then after one of the worst seasons of all time, comes out and says it was evident. It seemed like the coaching staff didn't want it. This team was better than a 14-win season when you look up and down the roster, and it just didn't happen. And it, like you said, it seemed most evident when the game plan and the players subbing in and out and what players we had playing, they were just terrible rotations through and through. And that's when it was most evident of, do you even know the personnel? Do you even know the intricacies of what these guys can do together? And it just didn't seem like Monty Williams had his head in the game. So to kind of keep following the storyline of JB Bickerstaff, from a lot of the articles I read and interviews about him, I see that he's very defensive minded head coach. And I kind of like that for the Detroit Pistons. Part of me also thinks that with adding a guy like in this year's draft, like a guy like Ron Holland, and adding Asar Thompson last season and the season before Jalen Duren, that this team is going to be very uniquely good at defense. What I need to see a little bit from the Detroit Pistons is consistency on the offensive end. Obviously, we all know how important defense is, especially in today's NBA, but you can't win games and score under 110 points in today's NBA. That's just what the NBA is. And we saw a lot of times last year, the Pistons not able to even hit the 100-point game mark. So I think that's going to be a big thing for the Pistons is, well, I get, you just never know. Maybe if the defense is so good, maybe you do win out these small bout games, but just in today's NBA, it's so hard to win that way. Ryan, one thing I'm really interested in, and I'm sure we'll have to talk about it on Instagram Lives or something, is I really want to see this press conference with JB Bickerstaff. We finally got an inside look at Ron Holland next to Trajan Langdon talking to the Pistons media. But I really want to see what JB Bickerstaff has to say, because that's really the biggest thing. When Monty Williams came in, he said a whole lot of nothing with using a lot of words. He kind of, in a way, just pacified people saying, I want to do this, I want to do that. But then it just never really happened. Where I want to see what JB Bickerstaff has to say, what he has to say about the roster, what his thoughts are on combos of, maybe putting Jaden Ivey more at the point guard position this season and maybe trying out Cade Cunningham at a 2-3, maybe trying out some of these different things that past coaches haven't used. It'll be interesting to me kind of what he sees, maybe putting Asar Thompson at the 2, Ron Holland at the 3, what kind of things JB Bickerstaff expects of this roster, what he wants to see this season. If he, we've said a lot of times how we want this team to be a possibly play in tournament candidate at best. And see what his thoughts are on that. If he just wants to get over 30 wins, what are some of his goals? Because, Monty Williams was, what was his saying last year? Like, we're not trying to rebuild, we're trying to restore. That was like some of the biggest phony stuff we'd ever heard. We believed it in the moment because we were so excited for what could come. But then we never saw that out of him. We never saw anything of glimpses of that. So I want to really see some of the hard, cold facts, details of what JB Bickerstaff has to say. I don't want this, phony, like light things. Like I want to see if, JB Bickerstaff has some hardcore detailed facts for us on what he imagines the Detroit Pistons this season. What are some of your final thoughts on JB Bickerstaff and the Detroit Pistons hiring him?
Yeah, like you mentioned before, like obviously JB Bickerstaff is a defensive-minded head coach. He doesn't think offensively as much as others do. And defensively, like we're atrocious. We're probably one of the worst defensive teams of all time, honestly. And that's even with Jalen Duren being thrown into the mix, with Asar Thompson being thrown into the mix, and now the addition of Ron Holland. Like those 3 guys alone are our defense. And throw Stu in there too. Stu is a great defender. Those 4 guys. Obviously, Ron Holland hasn't played with us yet this upcoming year because he's a rookie. He just got drafted. But it would be safe to assume that he is in the mix of one of the best defenders on this team. And offensively, we're bad too. So it would have been nice, I will say, to add a coach in there who's a little bit more balanced, who has a great offensive-minded scheme, but also has a great defensive-minded scheme. Because there's a lot of holes within this Pistons team. Obviously, we couldn't get over the 100 mark this season on a consecutive note. But, like, obviously, I would say Cade can score, Duren can score, Jaden Ivey can score, Asar Thompson, given the right situation, can score. Simone Fontecchio can score. Like all these guys can score. That's not the issue. Defense is our issue, but offense, there's a big issue there too. Because if you can't get 100 points, that's saying something. Monty Williams, obviously, we signed him for a 6-year deal. Tom Gore's committed to him for a very long time on a very massive contract, and we fire him after 1 season. Then you have Trajan Langdon here, who in return fires Monty immediately after 1 season, goes, yep, he's not my guy. And yet in that situation, you'd probably be going, well, maybe I should play it safe, sign a coach to a smaller contract, so I'm not worrying about paying this massive contract to a guy that I could get rid of right away. Or maybe it's just the situation of the years. Maybe you want to give him a short-term deal, make him earn that next contract. But yet Trajan Langdon committed to a 5-year deal with JB Bickerstaff. That shows you something, because in the press conference with Ron Holland there, the introductory press conference, you had there Trajan Langdon saying, I am very comfortable with the guy to my left, very comfortable in the player that I drafted at 5, who a lot of people, a lot of analysts, a lot of critics out there wouldn't have taken Ron Holland at 5. A lot of guys would have taken him maybe at 11, if that, maybe at 8, 9, but that's pushing it. Nobody was taking him at 5. He was not projected to be a top 5 pick. Coming out of high school, was ranked number 2 in the class of 2023. First off, that the fact alone that he was ranked that high coming out of high school, highly touted player, could have gone to Duke, but turned all those top tier blue blood programs down, went the Ignite level route, rather, and yet has put himself in a position where Langdon's going, yeah, I'm very comfortable with this guy to my left. If he's very comfortable making that selection, very new into this Pistons role, and is very comfortable offering JB Bickerstaff a 5-year deal after firing Monty, who is owed over, what is it, $62 million over the next 5 years. Like that's just crazy
Yeah.
that he's committing to JB Bickerstaff just like that. So what this everything tells me is that Langdon knows exactly what he's doing. He knows his plan. He knows the identity that he wants to create, something that Tom Gores failed to do with Troy Weaver, failed to do with Monty Williams. So Langdon's come in and go like, hey, I know this is what you want to do, but let me do it my way. Let me really get into the knit and grit. And yes, we can have multiple conversations. We can have hour-long conversations, but trust in me. Trust in me like the way that you wanted to trust in Troy Weaver. Trust in me like you wanted to trust in Monty Williams, but they couldn't get the job done. I'm the right guy for this job. Just follow my plan, follow my lead. And that's what Langdon has done. So far, he's hired multiple execs to fill in with the front office role. He's really built his front office, just now hiring JB Bickerstaff. And something to note is that was Jarrett Jack was at the press conference, the introductory press conference for Trenton Langdon, and was there for Ron Holland. That tells me that I think Jarrett Jack is staying on long term.
Right.
I don't think he's going anywhere. But that's cool to see, that the fact that Monty brought him in and yet he's sticking through. And that shows you the commitment there at that level. But what I expect out of JB Bickerstaff is I expect a lot, obviously, because Monty did a terrible job. Troy Weaver did a terrible job. Dwayne Casey, loved Dwayne Casey. There was not much he could do, really. And then even before Dwayne Casey, you had Sam Van Gundy, who's a terrible head coach. Like the fact that he's been fired from not only the Pistons, but Orlando and New Orleans, like there's a lot of different spots that he's been fired out of. And yet people go back to him because they want more news and just they want to listen to him talk. I don't want to listen to that. The point is, like, what I'm expecting out of JB Bickerstaff is a guy that not only develops this young team into everything that we all as Pistons fans see, but also puts his foot down and just follows the direction of our front office, because Monty was not following that direction. He was wanting to lose. And if we can just get somebody to listens and follows directions the right way, develops these players, not only does have a defensive mind, but also has a balanced approach to the game, something that we haven't had in a while, and actually commits to these guys like he committed to the Cavaliers players 5 seasons. If we can get a committed coach who can pretty much tell his plan outright, but also follow directions, I think this is a great hire for the Pistons.
Make sure to comment below your thoughts, questions, and opinions on the Detroit Pistons hiring JB Bickerstaff as head coach for the next, hopefully, 5 years. That will do it for episode number 30 of season 2. Make sure to like and subscribe, and we will see you guys in episode number 37. Peace.